If you're an athlete, you know the greatest motivator of all is the fear of letting your teammates down. After all, a team is only as good as its weakest link. So you owe it to those wearing the same jersey as you to be your best every time you step on the field. That's why there's no vape in team. When you vape, you can expose your lungs to toxic chemicals that can damage your lungs. If you're a step behind, the team's a step behind. Brought to you by The Real Cost and the FDA.
When we in North America travel abroad, there are those destinations we hit where they drive from the left side of the road, and we look at that and we call it wrong. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, a podcast now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. Tornadoes are microscale areas of rapidly dropping barometric pressure. When this happens, it is a mind-bending counterclockwise draw of air in the northern hemisphere. Did you hear me? Counterclockwise. Always counterclockwise. Except for that time back in 2019. The one that happened on this day in weather history. Search anywhere online. Go ahead. Well, after this episode. Go ahead, do it. Do it. Look up tornado dynamics. And you will find in their myriad collection of tongue-twisting words, cyclonic vorticity mentioned everywhere. Let me say it again in slow motion. Cyclonic. On the evening of June 15th, 2019, this day in weather history, a tornado touched down northeast of Esteline, South Dakota. Nothing too out of the ordinary here. When you're on the border of the central and the northern plain states, you will have tornadoes. But it was a rare event because it was rotating clockwise, also known as anticyclonic. That means it was twisting in the total opposite direction of most twisters in the northern hemisphere. That's right. The majority of tornadoes we experience in this northern hemisphere spin counterclockwise, cyclonic, just like larger scale low pressure systems from whence they spawn. These lows produce our clouds and therefore the rain and so on and so forth. And if these clouds billow high enough and become unstable enough, there is the propensity for thunderstorms. The more severe, the better the dynamics that are in place for tornadoes. But I digress. The only takeaway is that this is all based on the atmospheric science that dictates that in the northern hemisphere, our lows rotate counterclockwise. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider. But there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective. And oftentimes, they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. So in this incredibly rare case, what happened? All right, truth up front. The National Weather Service in Aberdeen, South Dakota, and they know tornadoes. They estimated that under 1% of tornadoes in the entire northern hemisphere rotate clockwise, like the one near Elistine, which we're looking at today. It was the first tornado to touch down in South Dakota that year, and was only on the ground for about 45 seconds. It was very rare, very brief, and very weak, as it was rated EF0 on the enhanced Vegeta scale by the NWS. The twister's peak winds were estimated to have been around 75 miles per hour, or 120 kilometers per hour. Like I said, it was on the ground for only 45 seconds, so how far could it have traveled? The answer? Not far. It only went 1/10 of a mile. That's about 0.16 kilometers. So it was brief to say the least. But it dropped and it rolled with a healthy footprint. Its width was still 10 yards wide, so it had to have hit something. As far as the extent of the damage it caused, if it weren't for the weird clockwise spin breaking all the rules, this tornado wouldn't have been very newsworthy at all. But that rare occurrence is news in itself. It was unreal. It was unnatural. It was downright un-American, I tell you. Tornadoes are supposed to spin counterclockwise, not clockwise, like this one did this day in weather history. Not sure where that voice came from, but anyway, tomorrow is June 16th. In 2017, an area of low pressure began to organize from a tropical disturbance in the western Caribbean Sea near the coast of Nicaragua and Honduras. When it matured and made history, it would be known as Tropical Storm Cindy, and would continue to spin and carve through the Gulf of Mexico until the 22nd of this month. Who felt it and who took the worst of it is all coming up tomorrow on This Day in Weather History with me, your host, Chris May.